Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the master bather, Scott Bradfield. I'm going to try to do a better job with the opening of this week's talk that I did last week when the sound of Peter Gunn music clashed with my puppy barking and biting me and me shouting and talking. So it's just going to be me talking nonsense for the next 5-10 minutes. This week we're kind of catching up. Over the past few months, we've been reading our way through the amazing and indescribable R.A. Lafferty. He's really, literally indescribable. But all I can do is just keep mentioning him to you. This is the third volume of this really, really handsome series of collected fictions. They call it collected fictions? The collected short fiction of R.A. Lafferty from the amazing Centipede Press. They just do a really, really lovely stuff. And we read the third volume, and at the same time, I've been catching up, rereading some of the novels, some of which I read when I was like 16 or 17 years old. These things really hold up really well. Lafferty's stuff doesn't date at all. It's not really again. It's not science fiction. It's not even really fantasy. It's weird, philosophical, comic, narrative humor, and it's just having a piss time, making people laugh and come up with crazy ideas, and real narrative conviction. By that I mean he starts a story, he believes that story, however crazy, and he finishes the story, which most writers they just don't do it. I can't. One of the things that's difficult about talking about Lafferty is here. I just read this third volume of his short stories. Some of these stories I read many times over the years, like Snuffles and 900 Grandmothers. I've read them many times. And I can't remember them for 2 weeks after I read them. That's not because they're not good. It's just that there's so many different ideas running around in these stories. And each one, he starts off with a crazy idea, and he really follows through with it. It doesn't turn into surreal nonsense like most contemporary fiction does. Contemporary fiction now today is just coming up with crazy ideas, and then you never finish it. He really finishes his stories. I've still got my cocktail from the Puppy Noir, the disastrous Puppy Noir episode last week, in the floral patterned glass that Hammett recommended, by the way. And I'll just give you an example. I can't remember most of these stories. I just finished it a few weeks ago. There's one story that just really haunts me. And again, I'm going to probably inaccurately recall it. It's called Selenium Ghosts of the 1870s. And I want to say that this is a fairly late story of his. No, it's 1978. It's one I didn't see when it came out. The premise of the story is that in the Victorian period, they had an early version of television. It's kind of like early versions of radio, early versions of photography. And it was selenium. It was made based on selenium. And some guy created a TV network and started producing television shows, which they were sending out. And the story basically starts off with that crazy idea. And then it starts to describe, it transcribes the TV shows that they were showing, which features 2 or 3 of the same actors. And at first you think, oh, he's just coming up with crazy ideas. But as these stories are transmitted, and he's transcribing these old stories of this Victorian period of television, a relationship between the male and female characters, the male and female actors, starts to develop throughout the story. It's a very long, funny story that fulfills an idea and then follows it through to the end. And every story of his book I've ever read does that. So this is worth checking out. Here's 2 other books. I think I've talked about the old Ace specials. I was a big fan of these when I was a kid. And I'm sure the first time I read these books, when I was 14 or 15, I didn't get them at all, as I recall. I remember liking them in parts and not getting them. Lafferty's novels are considered not his best stuff. I think I've mentioned this in the past. And I think one of the reasons I'm going back and rereading through his work is that there's 2 myths that need to be kind of sorted out in my own head. And that is, a lot of his early stuff was better than his later stuff. And that's not true. You can sort of see that from the collected fictions, because these stories are being selected from the 60s through the 80s and 90s and up to his death. And some of the late stories are incredible, just as good as the early stuff. And the other myth is that his novels aren't worth reading. And I don't think that's true anyway, but I particularly rereading them reminds me that that's not true. Again, I forgot them. I just reread these a few months ago. And this is Fourth Mansions. This is his third or fourth novel. It has to do with secret conspiracies of people who have been running Earth and running the universe for millions of years. So they're kind of like theosophical creatures and of various descriptions. And I can't remember them all. I love this book. I've read this a few times, probably more than any other of his books. And yet at the last third of the book, like the last third of Reefs of Earth, kind of gets lost. So you sometimes feel like he kind of did run out of ideas, or he ran, and it sort of wanders off. Mixed. I love the book, but it's not necessarily. It may not be the best place to start. Many people think Past Master is his best book. I think it's his first book. He published 2 or 3 books in 1968, and someone corrected me. I think I said Space Chanty was his first novel. This may have come out before that. The premise is that some far future planet, it's all just crazy ideas that he just takes seriously. Some planet that's being invaded by robots needs to find somebody who will run their planet and take them through some crisis of all these giant robots trying to tear everybody apart. And they go back in time and get Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, real from like the Man for All Seasons, Thomas More. And the joke in that was, I wrote it down somewhere, I can't remember what he says. They say they're looking for somebody who will do the right thing. And Thomas More did the right thing once. It's a joke. And normally I think that, okay, that's just one laugh. But they go back and get the guy, and they follow through with this idea that he has to come to this planet and save everybody. And this does really hold together. It's constantly coming up with new ideas, but the central premise idea is never forgotten, and it's a really, really lovely piece of writing. Going through these again, this is a book I remember loving when I read it. The Devil is Dead. I strongly recommend. I would say this is, of all the books, I think this is the best start to the Lafferty novels. Maybe Space Chanty, but I love The Devil is Dead. It's about a group of kind of. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what kind of universe we're in Lafferty, but it's a bunch of people. The head character's named Finnegan, and it's a bunch of people who get on a boat with a super wealthy man named Saxon Seaworthy, I think, and another character named Papa Diabolos, who is the devil. They keep referring to him as the Papa Devil, and they travel all over the world in this boat, and they're constantly murdering each other and burying each other, and coming back to life. And it could be read in a number of ways. I just read it as a completely whacked out science fantasy, and they're often wondering, what do you do about the devil? So the devil's on the boat with them. This has got some incredible writing in it, like all of his stories, particularly narrative writing and dialogue. And I wanted to just end this. I'm just going to pick he likes to describe these kind of femme fatale women, and when he describes it, they're quite funny. Here's one of the 2 women that Finnegan finds attractive and comes on the boat with them. I think her name is this Anastasia? Anastasia Demetriades is her name. They were together a lot that week. They exulted in the town and the beach. She was wry and friendly, often pretty, and sometimes a sort of burlesque of the pretty, for she still changed. She was so wiry that Finnegan could hardly wrestle her down when they clowned on the beach. Yet she was very small. A fortune card weighing machine on the beach showed her at 130 pounds, though Finnegan would have guessed her at 90. He could feel the bones in her, and it was like an electric shock. There was nothing wrong with having bones the way she had them. There was nothing wrong with having a touch of sea green in the olive and gold complexion, or the paradoxical soft hardness and cooling fever that Anastasia always maintained. When she spoke, she set up harmonics as though she were in tune with every shell of the ocean. She spoke now, but as always, her first half-dozen words tumbled into Finnegan's mind before the sound began. The beach isn't quite the same, but the sea is the sea, she said. I was 10 years old when I came to this country. I was born on an island. There was a hill in the center of it, and from there you can see 20 islands and 2 parts of the mainland. We will go there, I am sure. Seaworthy will not be able to pass it by. Besides, I believe that he has mysterious business there. So again, we have all the characters continue through the stories. They seem kind of, it almost seems surreal. It is surreal to some extent, but it's all narratively consistent. I can't describe it better than that. And I would go get The Devil is Dead if you really are trying to find either that or a book of his stories. This is a good place to check the novels out. And I do think the novels get a bad press. They're definitely worth reading. And many of them are like this are very good. Okay, that's our Lafferty this week. And we'll come back to him soon because I got tons of Lafferty I've got to read or reread. All right, bye.